You have just won the lottery, and today we are talking about your lucky day. Your lucky day hits Blu-ray, DVD, digital, and video on demand from Wellgo Entertainment. Today, of all days, if you guys are interested in checking out this movie, the links are in the descriptions below to check it out. Your Lucky Day depicts the story of a young man played by Angus Cloud in either one of his last roles or his last role ever. That basically is at a convenience store when a guy wins the lottery. He steals the ticket from him, and an entire just crazy sea of events follow. This movie across the board has solid acting in it. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Euphoria. I've just never been able to get into that show. But after seeing Cloud's performance in this, I walked away with two things. First, we lost someone immensely talented, way too young. And two, I understand why people love Euphoria on top of all of the other brilliant cast members that are in that show. And Cloud just really has a commanding performance about him in this movie that balances between being very charismatic and just being actually very threatening. And Cloud just has a commanding presence about him in this movie, and I do not think I would be rating or talking about this movie as highly as I am if it wasn't for his performance. His performance alone is enough to check out this movie. Like, this movie has a lot of good, thrilling moments about it, but it doesn't land as effectively as it does without Cloud's performance. As a whole, I think this movie overall, like I said, it has a lot of thrilling moments. I definitely would say first 2/3 of this movie definitely gripped me, definitely brought me to the edge of my seat. But then it just kind of falls apart in the third act. So there's kind of a twist and or subplot, depending on how you look at it, that they add in towards the last little bit of the second act into the third act, and that kind of just really threw the movie off for me. By the end of the second act, this movie feels like something completely something else than how it started. And normally I'm here for an evolution or movies that are gonna grow and really challenge you as the viewer. But when your movie feels like a completely unnecessary change, it just rubs me the wrong way. And unfortunately, Your Lucky Day falls victim to that. Honestly, every performance in this movie just knocks it out of the park. And that kind of really holds me on even after somewhat of the story change. The performances, they still got me, they still hooked me, and I was here for every second of it. I wish the action in this movie felt a little bit more intense. Like, the action kind of comes with the change. But then again, the action wasn't enough to really kind of hook me and grip me to make me appreciate said change. This movie overall feels like a drama and it operates like a drama, but it hits those dramatic points really sharp to where it borders on thriller, but it never reaches there. And honestly, that really worked for me because I feel like a large portion of the setup of this movie, the first act of this movie, and even the majority of the second act of this movie just kind of kept hitting those really sharp notes that kept drawing me to the edge of my seat. And I was really hooked. I was really invested into these characters. The character development was here for me. And then you had that shift. I'm going to go ahead and just run this one through the Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give Your Lucky Day a 3 out of 5. I think for the most part, this film hits every note that it's intending to hit, and overall, it works in its favor, but the last act of this movie really brought the quality down for me. Not only is there a tone shift that doesn't quite stick the landing, but there's also a genre change in this one as well that really kind of tries to shake it up, but that shake up feels way too late. As I mentioned, Your Lucky Day is now available from Wellgo Entertainment on Blu-ray, DVD, and digital. Links are in the show notes below to check it out. I feel like I had to sit with this one for a while, but let's talk about Founders Day. Founders Day tells the story of a small town that is shaken when a group of killings take place and that are all themed around a judge bringing quote-unquote justice to said small town, and a mystery unravels. I wanted desperately to like this movie. I thought the premise for it was really solid. I thought the character design of the judge as our antagonist looked awesome. And even some of the death sequences in this movie, awesome. But here is the thing, is that there is no redeeming qualities to any characters within this town. William Russ is kind of the one kind of redeemable character in here. He is probably arguably the best part of this movie. But I feel like this movie overall is just kind of all over the place. And what I mean specifically is it feels like it can never pick the lane that it wants to be in. Like, take the acting, for example. The acting across the board is passable. There are some performances in here that are so bad that they're funny, and then there are some in here that are just so bad that it is cringeworthy every time they're on screen. Jace Beartalk is a great example of this because every time that he is on screen, there is just a level of just overacting that is taking place. He is one of the worst performances in this movie, but yet there's such an inconsistency from his performance throughout the course of this. Like, I don't know if the direction that the actors were given was to kind of be this very over-the-top kind of movie in the vein of The Room or Showgirls, but it definitely feels like that, and it definitely feels like there are major inconsistencies throughout the course of this in its tone. Beartalk in particular is a really interesting performance to consider because some of his performance in here is actually not that bad, and then some of it is just over the top and almost feels melodramatic, almost to the equivalent of like a CW or a soap opera performance. Tyler James White is another performance in here that kind of just has that inconsistency to where he's really annoying for about 90% of this time that he's on screen, and he ends up somehow redeeming himself for like the last 10 minutes of the movie. But even those last 10 minutes isn't enough to kind of save the inconsistencies throughout. Now, as a horror movie, there is not a whole lot to sink your teeth into, which was arguably my biggest frustration coming out of this movie. Like, there's not a lot of bloodshed, there's not a lot of gags, but what I will say is one of the very few redeeming qualities of this movie is the fact that the gags that are here are very well done. But those elements of the movie are separated by a literal ocean of melodrama and just dramatic political crap that you as the audience just don't really care about. At some point, this becomes somewhat of a political satire, and I'm not even sure you could call it that, but that's what it feels like. And the politics of the internal characters feel like they get so much of the focus, and this movie really just kind of loses its identity. I keep coming back to the idea of the inconsistencies littered throughout this and the tone of this movie. It's not quite sure if it wants to be a drama, not quite sure if it wants to be a satire, not quite sure if it's a horror movie, and it kind of just takes a little bit of elements from everything in there. This movie also takes elements from Thanksgiving and Scream, and both of those movies did what this movie is trying to do immensely better. I think I'm ready to run this one through the Rorschach rating scale, and I am going to go ahead and give Founders Day a 1 out of 5. This movie has the potential to be one of the worst movies of this year. This movie offers very little. It is in need of a massive retrial because it has no idea what it wants to be. The actors seem to have no idea what type of movie they're acting in and what they're responding to. And on top of that, this movie could have been fun had it just had more blood, more gags, and more creativity from the horror aspect. But as it kind of continues to try and pursue the political satire, it ultimately ends up losing itself. If you guys have seen Founders Day, what did you guys think about it? Comment below and let me know, but let's talk about mental health. If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health out of the film which we're reviewing, talk about it for a few moments, and the host to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. One of the very few things I think this film does right is it kind of does explore the character journey of grief and what that looks like. Throughout its near 2-hour runtime, we get to grieve with several members of the town, and each demonstrate that we all grieve in our own way. And that's one of the biggest things that I walked away with this movie, especially involving the conversation of mental health, is that grief is not a one-size-fits-all. It is a always developing and always evolving, and very much like silly putty. It is always going to be something to someone else that it may not be to you and to the other person, and that's okay. Because life is filled with tragedies, and we're all different people, and we're all going to respond to those tragedies completely differently. Just because you don't grieve the way that someone else does doesn't necessarily mean that you're broken, or vice versa. It just means that you are healing at your own pace and at your own leisure. If you or someone you know is currently struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, click the links in the show notes below to check out our mental health resource library and more. That's it. That's all I got for you guys. Founders Day is now playing in theaters everywhere from Dark Sky Films. Hit that subscribe button below. Check out our mental health resource library, other movie reviews, podcasts, Patreon, and more. All of that is in the show notes below.